Good morning, good morning.
Good morning.
Morning. Good morning. Good morning
Good
to all.
morning.
Morning,
Good morning,
everyone.
everyone.
This morning to all.
Morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hey, good morning, all.
Good morning.
Good morning, all.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Pleasant good morning.
Morning to you.
The message is in the heart as expected says. Hello, Judy Daniel.
Morning, morning, morning.
Good morning, Anna.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning, Jerome.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Pleasant good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning. Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
What about?
CBSI Connect system is one of our main regional projects under the Caribbean Basin Security Initiative, which started in 2010 and was a recognition by the CARICOM states, the Dominican Republic, and the United States that we needed a joint approach to some of the security issues that we're facing in the Caribbean. So CBSI Connect was a way to promote law enforcement information sharing across the Caribbean region.
CBSI Connect allows each institution to act independently with its own independent portal site, but also replicate credentials to a shared site where collaboration and learning can take place among all participating institutions.
Through the Caribbean Basin Security Initiative, we've started several regional programs, whether that's justice sector training, training on ballistics investigations, or law enforcement investigations training. And through CBSI Connect, these trainings can be broadcast to all member states.
Academies, agencies have been using it. We have had an increase in enrollment of participants for courses.
The knowledge that has been gained in the field, the knowledge that has been gained in the region can be shared, and that sharing and that collaboration is what makes this a very special asset moving forward for Caribbean law enforcement.
CBSI Connect users can either view our trainings at the academies themselves that are installed conference centers, or they can even use it at their on their laptops at home. And I believe we now also have mobile capability, so it is truly a training system that's accessible anywhere.
We have regular meetings with heads of academies. We meet regularly with agencies in the region. We get their input into courses and programs that are being offered on CBSI Connect.
Trafficking in people, trafficking in drugs, trafficking in money transcends the participating institutions in the region and truly becomes regional problems. The sharing of information, shedding sunlight, sharing expertise is a very important tool in combating these issues.
We've seen several positive impacts from the availability of training on CBSI Connect. One of them, of course, is a travel cost savings, because you no longer have to spend a day traveling and buy an expensive flight to go receive a training at another academy.
The training that has been done on CBSI Connect for law enforcement officers has had tremendous response. We have had an increase in enrollment of participants on CBSI Connect. We have had academies putting more courses on CBSI Connect. We have had training every month on CBSI Connect.
We encourage the use of the system for both internal training and external training, and we are trying to build out the library of available courses stored on the system, and we encourage our member states to upload their individual training, which they want to share with the community.
If there are courses that are available that pique your interest, that could enhance your job, your ability to perform your duties as a professional over CBSI Connect, seek them out, participate, engage. This is really the value of what this technology brings to the region.
And that has allowed different academies to build much stronger ties with each other and cooperate on shared law enforcement challenges in the region.
Josh?
Mr. Jason D. Reichelt, Corruption and Economic Crime Branch Division for the Treaty of Affairs, United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime. Mr. Earl Aris, Assistant Director of Strategic Services, CARICOM and PAX. Colleagues from CARICOM and PAX, regional representatives from the Offices of Attorney General, National Police, National Intelligence, Financial Intelligence Units, Customs and Excise Departments, Departments of Immigrations, prisons, other members of law enforcement, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. My name is Josh Drayton. I'm the Financial Crimes and Asset Recovery Specialist at CARICOM and PAX, and it is indeed an honor and pleasure to have you participants here today to recognize International Anti-Corruption Day. Our theme is Recover with Integrity. We are one in the anti-corruption fight. This is very important as we engage in activities related to COVID-19 and the impact that COVID-19 has had on all our territories. And we recognize that corruption risks have also increased. This webinar is in fact a sensitization webinar for members of the law enforcement community to better able to recognize what is corruption, identify some of the key risks related to corruption, but also determine what part you are going to play in the anti-corruption fight. We have a very interesting set of presentations today. The first session that will be delivered will be on what is corruption and how can I combat it. And there's another session that's going to be delivered by Mr. Dion Abdul, who will be joining us a bit later. And it's titled, How Can Civil Society and Law Enforcement Work Together to Combat Corruption? At this moment, I would like to welcome Mr. Earl Harris, who will be giving some opening remarks on behalf of CARICOM Impacts.
Thank you, Josh. I hope everyone is hearing me loud and clear.
Yes, we are.
Okay. I would have loved to say all protocols observed, but I don't think I have that luxury this morning. So, Mr. Jason Reichard, Corruption and Economic Crime at Branch, Division for Treaty Affairs, UNODC. Mr. Dion Abdul, Chair of Trinidad and Tobago Transparency Institute, colleagues from CARICOM Impacts, regional representatives from the offices of the Attorneys General, Royal Police Forces, National Intelligence Agencies, Financial Intelligence Units and related bodies, Customs and Excise Departments, Departments of Immigration. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's a pleasure for me to provide some opening remarks on behalf of the Executive Director of CARICOM Impacts, who could not be with us this morning. I'd like to say welcome to our Anti-Corruption Day webinar. CARICOM Impacts is pleased to partner with the UNODC and the Trinidad and Tobago Transparency Institute to host this webinar in recognition of Anti-Corruption Day. As you all know, corruption is a global, transnational problem, which has a destabilizing effect on all societies, as it not only robs the state of resources that could be used for developmental purposes, but also increases social inequality, given that those who are most affected by corruption are the most vulnerable in society. Political and public sector corruption is particularly more damaging, as those elected officials are placed in a position of trust meant to guard the patrimony of the state. When public officials engage in corrupt activities such as accepting bribes and kickbacks, the effect is more devastating, given that citizens seldom have recourse for such injustices. Members of law enforcement agencies play an integral role in upholding justice and ensuring fair play among social actors. Therefore, when law enforcement officials engage in corrupt activities or behaviors, there's a direct negative impact on the criminal justice system. The effects of the general rule of law and fundamental rights of citizens. This affects the general rule of law and fundamental rights of citizens. The effects of corruption have been further exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, as governments and law enforcement agencies have been thrown into crisis mode, limited supply of equipment and medical supplies, which has led to increases in fraud and counterfeit goods on the market. Governments have had to accelerate procurement processes, which increase the risk of corruption in public procurement due to weak public oversight. As criminal networks experience reductions in the supply of drugs and guns due to the closure of borders, there has been an increased targeting of key law enforcement officials to facilitate their trade, thereby making them susceptible to bribes. Further increases in unemployment due to layoffs and closure of businesses because of the pandemic have motivated citizens to engage in other income-generating activities, which may have illicit connections. Fighting corruption and building integrity in law enforcement agencies are important for all countries, as it strengthens public institutions, builds public trust, and ensures the rule of law. It also strengthens the quality of democracy, since citizens are assured that their rights and freedoms will be upheld. Our role at CARICOM Impacts is an important one in building integrity and sound ethical practices in law enforcement agencies and in the Caribbean. Not only are we responsible for building the capacity of law enforcement agencies, but we are also responsible for convening meetings with various chiefs and heads of law enforcement agencies. This convening power can act as a catalyst for change, since those leaders will be responsible for implementing such changes. Corruption at a national level has also been identified in the CARICOM Crime and Security Strategy, which was approved by CARICOM heads at its 24th intersessional meeting held in Haiti in February 2013. This was again reviewed in 2018, and we are working with member states in their fight against corruption. Most member states, I'm happy to report, have enacted integrity legislation, criminalized bribery, and are working on effective strategies to prevent various acts of corruption. CARICOM is committed to disrupting, dismantling, and defeating organized crime within its borders, paying particular attention to corruption, money laundering, and the facilitators of crime. Organized crime is primarily motivated by profit. The community's objective and commitment is to make the business of criminality in any form non-viable, to create an environment that is openly hostile to transnational organized crime, and to dismantle criminal activities and networks in the community. Anti-Corruption Day was first named as an occasion on the UN calendar in 2003 to highlight the effects of corruption and foster greater cooperation and advocacy to address the problem. Because it also highlighted the need to accelerate the adoption and implementation of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. Today, as we recognize International Anti-Corruption Day, we acknowledge the enormous steps that have been taken to combat corruption globally and among our member states. At the same time, however, there is still much work to be done, as citizens and members of law enforcement need to be regularly sensitized on corruption in its various forms and be reminded of their role in the anti-corruption fight. Therefore, the aim of this webinar is to sensitize delegates to anti-corruption strategies by providing an overview of key terms and concepts related to corruption, as well as discussing scenarios on bribery, ethics, and nepotism. Additionally, it provides a framework for civil society and law enforcement agencies to work together to combat corruption in the wider society. As we rally around the theme, Recover with Integrity, we are one in the anti-corruption fight, we underscore the need to partner and work together as stakeholders. The participation of all agencies and organizations present today is a demonstration of the commitment to work with and across geographies, agencies, and individuals to advance the anti-corruption fight. Finally, we wish to thank the UNODC and Trinidad and Tobago's Transparency Institute and you, the participants, for participating in this webinar. And we hope that you utilize the information provided to work together to build a corruption-free region. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harris, for those opening remarks. We now hand over to Mr. Jason Reichelt from the UNODC.
Thank you very much, Josh, and all protocols observed. I would like to begin by joining others in extending a very warm welcome to all of the participants for this very important webinar. I am equally impressed with the number of participants up early out there. Good morning to everyone. Good afternoon from Vienna, Austria, where I am speaking to you from our headquarters here in Vienna. I also want to say what a great pleasure and honor it is for the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime to be participating in this webinar. And thank you very much to CARICOM Impacts for inviting us to participate. International Anti-Corruption Day is certainly the most important day on our calendar, working in the Corruption and Economic Crime branch. And it's my pleasure to be sharing part of that day with you, thanks to CARICOM Impacts and the longstanding partnership where UNODC has helped to provide support and assistance and training to the CARICOM Impacts program. So thank you very much for that. As was just said by the opening remarks, now more than ever, corruption is a threat. It's a threat to sustainable development. It's a threat to peace and security. It's a threat to opportunity and progress for citizens. I think we all know that quite well. Our point of departure in the UN system for talking about corruption is the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, and you'll be hearing some about that today if you're not already
familiar with it. But what I want to stress to this audience is that the Convention Against Corruption is not just a legal document. It's not just a set of laws that countries must adopt. It's also very operational. It provides obligations for the 178 states, the 178 countries, or sorry, 187 countries that have ratified it, to ensure that law enforcement, prosecutors are independent, that they have the resources that they need and the facilities they need to tackle corruption, that they're allowed to engage in special investigation techniques, which could include undercover operations, wiretaps, whatever the law allows, to provide all available resources to law enforcement, to prosecutors, to combat corruption. It's an obligation under the UN Convention to make sure that your bodies, your institutions are fully operational to engage in this fight. Now, the theme for this year's Anti-Corruption Day, as was already mentioned, is Recover with Integrity. And of course, we're recovering soon, hopefully sooner than later, from the COVID-19 pandemic. But I think it's clear that the pandemic has changed the way that all of us have been working. And it has created many new corruption challenges that I think many countries are only now becoming more familiar with, including the diversion and theft of resources intended for hospitals, medical facilities, and other institutions providing support to those who are in need. Fraud in economic stimulus and rescue packages, where people are claiming benefits they're not entitled to, or claiming more than they are supposed to be receiving. We see a lot of procurement fraud, where contracts for personal protective equipment, for masks, for ventilators, are being awarded to companies that either may not exist or may never have done the kind of work before that is required in the medical context, or the contracts are awarded to friends or relatives or close associates of political actors who have the power to award such contracts. We're seeing that a lot in many, many countries in the context of the pandemic. Price gouging and bribery. So of course, the private sector knows where there's an opportunity to make money, and you see a lot of corruption now in the private sector, and you see bribery, of course, by private sector individuals, of public officials, to receive contracts, to receive resources, to receive assistance when they may not be entitled to it. It is happening with increasing frequency. And of course, substandard equipment, in some cases even fraudulent equipment or false medications that promise the hope of relief, but are really just made by criminals to make a quick buck at the expense of people who really need it. And as you can tell from all of these examples of corruption in the pandemic context, unlike corruption we might have seen in other contexts, or what we might call, routine sort of corruption that we all are familiar with, this actually means lives are on the line. People are losing lives around the world today because of corruption, and not as many people have to die if corruption were prevented, and not just detected and investigated, but actually prevented. And it creates a situation that I think makes us all realize how law enforcement must remain vigilant and prosecutors must remain vigilant to tackle these additional challenges that we're now facing. And the recovery process will be the same. So recover with integrity as we move, hopefully soon, out of the crisis of the pandemic itself into the recovery. It's not only economic recovery, of course, it also will be medical recovery in the allocation, distribution of one or more vaccines. Questions about who will get it and who will get it first mean that there will be deals made in the back rooms. There will be bribes paid. We will be watching very closely for false or fake vaccination cards that seem to promote the idea that someone received a vaccine when in fact they did not. We are already seeing this in some countries outside of your region. I know there have been reports of this already occurring even before vaccines have been distributed. But law enforcement, of course, as we know, cannot do this alone. And not only do you need the resources, you need the tools to become fully operational, you also need the people to provide you with evidence, to report when there is corruption, to blow the whistle, to be your partners, to provide you with leads, to provide you with viable opportunities for investigation to take place. And of course, that means we need whistleblower and witness protection mechanisms. We need reporting systems. We need to educate the public as to what corruption is and how to best report it. And it requires partnerships from citizens, from the private sector, from civil society, from journalists, all providing support When corruption is seen, when corruption is experienced, it must be reported and it must be investigated. As we all know, and we certainly all hope, the pandemic will one day be over. But unfortunately, corruption is likely to be with us for a much longer period of time. And as law enforcement authorities and prosecutors and customs and borders officials, you are on the front line in this continuing battle to hold the corrupt accountable and ensure that justice is done. So once again, thank you very much from UNODC. It's a pleasure and honor to be here. I will stay as long as I possibly can to hear the very interesting presentations that are forthcoming. And I wish you a most productive webinar and most productive discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Reichelt from UNODC. At this point in time, we'll have a short video on the Anti-Corruption Day campaign. And thereafter, I'm going to ask all delegates, if you could, as far as possible, turn on your cameras so that we can take a group shot. So first the video, and then we move into the group shot. Thank you very much, Troy. And Candy, over to you in terms of directions. Participants, kindly turn on your cameras so that we can take a group shot.
Hi, morning, everyone. This is just a short photograph we are going to take of each of these screens. So just bear with us. I'm going to take out the first picture now. Okay. 1 minute. Okay, 1 minute. Let me just take out another one.
Anyway, one of the nice thing about that.
Okay, 1 minute, everyone. There's 8 pages, so just bear with me, please. Okay, 1 minute.
No, you see?
All right, 2 more pages, please. One more. Okay, and thank you guys.
And thank you very much, Candy.
I'm not seeing a video. So yeah, you need.
Mr. Ferguson, can you mute your mic, please? Thank you.
Okay, everyone. So now we're going to a bit more of the informal part of today's webinar. And this is titled, What is Corruption and How Can I Combat It? In fact, how can I combat it is going to be really your take on it. So you have to figure out, what is my role in this? And what you have discovered from what both Mr. Harris and Mr. Reichel have said is that corruption is in fact a global problem. And this problem is further exacerbated or complicated by the COVID-19 pandemic. Unlike what most of us would like to talk about with respect to corruption, and there's a substantial enough focus on grand corruption, primarily involving high-level public officials, etc. This particular session will focus on you and your role and how you are able to reflect on your own experiences as members of law enforcement and persons who may come in contact with others who engage in corrupt activities, or thoughts that may motivate you to think about engaging in corruption. Before I begin, I want to speak a bit about CARICOM impacts. Most of you will be aware of CARICOM impacts, but for those of you who are not, CARICOM impacts is in fact a part of the intergovernmental framework of CARICOM, Caribbean Community. And essentially what you see is that we are reporting, or part of our work is to report to the Council of the National Security and Law Enforcement. You probably heard Mr. Harris mention that we have various standing committees, and these are the bottom of it, the Standing Committee for Commissioners of Police, Standing Committee for Chiefs of Immigration, Military Heads, Customs, Intelligence, and Prisons. What this does is to provide a very strong and robust framework for both reporting, but also coordination activities within the region. We represent 15 member states and 5 associate states throughout the CARICOM region. And we were established as an entity coming out of a heads of government meeting in 14 years ago in July of 2006 in St. Kitts and Nevis. Our agency comprises 3 arms, or HQ or headquarters, and then 2 sub-agencies, the Joint Regional Communications Center and the Regional Intelligence Fusion Center located here in Trinidad. The JRCC is located in Barbados. Our structure, as mentioned, HQ, JRCC, RFC. So some of the things that we do within our HQ is in fact administration and oversight, policy formulation and strategy work, harmonization of legislation, etc., project implementation. And then at our border security arm in Barbados, JRCC, their focus is really on passenger targeting, and most of you will be familiar with the APIS, the Advanced Passenger Information System, tracking persons moving throughout the region, etc. Cargo profiling, immigration support, customs support, and of course, information sharing with national points of contact and across agencies. We also have our RFC, and the RFC is our intelligence arm. The main activity there is about information and intelligence sharing, providing different assessments and reports such as strategic threat assessments, providing the support for JRCC where necessary, and building the capacity among those within the intelligence community and law enforcement in particular. So I want to just go right into what is the picture within the region related to corruption. And it's important that we have a sense as to what citizens feel in relation to corruption, and in this particular instance, bribery. So this diagram shows 2 things. In orange, we have the percentage of public service users who said they paid a bribe within the last 12 months. And in blue, we have the percentage of persons who thought that corruption increased within the past 12 months. In all instances, you do recognize that the perception of actual corruption is more than, in fact, the acts of corruption in terms of those who paid a bribe. But at the same time, we do recognize that the average in all instances, with the exception of Barbados, is over 10% of the population. So what that means is that 1 in 10 persons polled in this particular survey called the Global Corruption Barometer, within the region, at least 1 in 10, and in some instances, 2 in 10 said, here's what, I'm using some of the public goods and services, have gone to get a license, have gone to interact with a immigration official, have gone to apply for some kind of public utility. Here's what, I have had to pay a bribe in order to get access to those public goods and services, and that's a problem. Let's continue. So let's disaggregate all of that. So as those say they paid the bribe, all right, what are the key sectors? So we see that we have several. In green, police bribery rates, and this is actual bribery. In yellow, identification card bribery rates. In orange, public schools bribery rates. In blue, utilities, as I mentioned, water, lights, etc. In gray, public clinics and health centers bribery rates. And in a darker blue, the overall bribery rates in the region. I want you to recognize that at a glance, we recognize that that green tends to take some kind of predominance and is quite high. We see in Jamaica, if we were to look at the bribery rates, you're talking about close to 20%. Likewise, in the Bahamas, we're talking over 10%. In Trinidad and Tobago, a little bit under 10. In Guyana, we recognize it's 40%. Now, this is a global survey that has been conducted. So it is not our story at CARICOM Impacts. It is what is out there about us, but it's also what people have said about their own jurisdictions. So it's important that if you look at this at a glance, that police who represent the entity that upholds the law, that enforces the law, is seen to be a bit more engaging in corruption. And this is something, and when we say police, we can think about the fact that when someone sees a police, they see a police, but they also see law enforcement. So it's also what is the perception of general law enforcement in this. So now that we have a big picture about the region and what the data is saying, let's jump into what is corruption, because quite often we speak about it and we don't know. So corruption, we probably would have heard this definition before, is the abuse of entrusted power for private gain. And this is one of the key definitions utilized by Transparency International. It speaks to the fact that there are persons who are given certain kinds of power by virtue of their office. And this is also demonstrated in the second definition, the abuse of public office for personal gain. So it means now that you are in a position of trust. You have been given this role by citizens, and there is some kind of abuse of this role. But coming into the final definition, and you would find that the scenarios and definitions that I give moving forward is in fact from Hope, who wrote a very robust book on police corruption and corruption law enforcement in 2016. So Hope says, any action or omission, any promise of an action or omission, any attempt of action or omission committed by a police officer or group of police officers characterized by the police officer's misuse of official position or organizational gain or advantage. We can take police officer and replace that with law enforcement, which would include all of you present today, or most of you. So that we recognize that the risk is quite high because of the level of public trust that is placed in you, but also we can speak about oversight, which we're gonna capture in the slide after this. NIE also presents some very good frameworks for us to identify, okay, what is in fact public sector corruption? So it's defined as behavior which deviates from normal duties of the public role because of some kind of private regarding interest. It may be your friend, it may be your family, and And then the gain here is really about pecuniary, money, financial gain, or status gain. Or it may violate the rules against the exercise of certain kinds of influence. So for example, most of you would have codes of conduct that could, or stipulations within the legislation that speak about how you should conduct yourself. There are in all jurisdictions, anti-bribery acts or prevention of corruption acts. And if you're at a higher level within law enforcement, you then come under the provisions for persons in public life and those exercising public functions. And so he then goes on to speak about bribery, which is the use of rewards to pervert the judgment of a person based on a position of trust. Nepotism, bestowal of patronage by reason of a ascriptive relationship rather than merit. So essentially what we're speaking about here is utilization of your position of power to benefit someone that is close, someone who's a family relative and that kind of thing. And it's not based on merit, it's based on your relationship that you have with them. And finally, we have here misappropriation, which is really the abuse of public resources and illegal appropriation of those resources for your personal benefit or the benefit of those who are close and around you. So what is the corruption risk? And this is a very good equation that helps to identify the corruption risk, at least on the surface. And corruption equals monopoly plus discretion minus accountability. So the monopoly here is that when we speak about law enforcement and public officials, there is a monopoly that you have, a monopoly in terms of your ability to dispense with justice, to implement sanctions. So therefore, you have that monopoly in terms of the provision of goods and services. The citizens do not have a and the other area is discretionary power by officials. So what we have here is that the power that you have is really dependent on your interaction with the person. And we're going to come across some scenarios a bit later that speak about this discretion. But this discretion with limited accountability, and that's why there's a -A, insufficient oversight or mechanisms for accountability. So that if you're interacting with someone who's coming in as an immigration official, you have the discretion to say, this is not a legitimate entry. If you are a customs official, you have the ability to search that person. If you're a police officer, you can pull over a vehicle or conduct raids. If you are in prisons, you also have similar kinds of powers. So what we're seeing coming out here is, in fact, that because you have this monopoly in terms of, some may even say, use of force, and you have the discretion in particular where it's really a decision by you or a small group of individuals. And in the absence of a clear accountability mechanisms, things can go wrong. So we're not suggesting here that everyone who works in law enforcement is in fact corrupt. I actually think that's not the truth. Members of law enforcement join law enforcement to uphold the law and in fact should be motivated by higher levels of integrity. And that is what this session is about. So I'm going into several scenarios here. Now that we have a general idea of what corruption is, and I tried not to make this session too technical to talk about the different international frameworks, etc. But I want to talk about scenarios. So this scenario here speaks about, you've been asked, hi?
Sorry. We do have 2 questions in the chat. Do you want to take them now or you'll wait?
Sure, I can.
Hold on. The green line, you showed a graph, a chart. So they want to know if the green line, does the green line police include customs?
No, the question was specific. So you're speaking about this. It's police bribery
Yes.
rates.
So they wanted to know if the green line includes customs.
No, the question was specific to police in this instance. Yeah.
All right. And then would all who paid a bribe admit that they did?
Well, based on this is actually data that speaks about those who paid a bribe. So if we were to go back to the first diagram, the orange is the percentage of public service users, citizens who admitted that I paid a bribe over the last 12 months. So it's actual bribery. So the blue in this instance is the perception, right? And then the orange has to do with those who admitted that. So then this bribery rate is a disaggregation of this this orange line, these orange lines that you see here in the diagram. Yeah.
All
I was
right.
able to answer that question.
And then also, in addition to the points already made, I believe our main threatening aspects of corruption involves the overwhelming obstacles in dismantling them because of our national dimension of influence, and second, their level of infiltration in society and economy.
Okay, so I take it that the question is really speaking about the influence of political actors in decision-making processes and the role that they play as being able to affect perhaps the resources, the decision-making process, the development of legislation, and facilitating. I suspect that's what the person is saying. Perhaps if they are on, they can provide some more details.
Mr. Benson?
Yes, you are correct, sir. What you just stated there, you have actually hit the nail on its head.
Great, yeah. So and that's the challenge, because what I'm trying to get at is way too often we speak about the political directive, which, by the way, is extremely important in terms of curbing corruption. You need that high-level strategic support. And yes, you do have instances where resources are diverted or stifled from certain kinds of agencies who may have worked assiduously to combat certain kinds of corruption or financial crimes. But at the same time, there is almost like we ignore petty corruption, which then leads to a culture of corruption, because the question has to do with whether our personal relationships create a certain level of cultural tolerance related to corruption in our jurisdictions. So it's kind of examining that to ask, as an investigator, I have to investigate the political director, and it's important to address political corruption. But at the same time, let us not also neglect various levels of corruption, petty corruption, and bribery, which then could lead to grand corruption, or in fact have some collusion between grand corruption and petty corruption. Because as corruption becomes more high level and grand corruption, you find that they involve various levels of persons along the bureaucratic chain, if it is public sector corruption, and it's more complex because there's so many actors involved. So actors at the low levels of law enforcement agencies are involved, as well as those at the decision-making and strategic level. Yeah?
Thank you, sir.
So we have to address corruption on all fronts.
Okay, maybe what we could do, I'm seeing some comments coming through on in the chat. I'm not too sure if persons want to comment now, Josh, before we go into the scenarios. So Michael, do you want to say something? Leanne, Martin, do you want to? But what Martin is saying is that was the rates done in every CARICOM member states? Because I'd like to know that of Suriname. So Martin is from Suriname. So he wanted to know if that covered all member states.
So Martin, no, the countries that I've identified there are the countries within the region. What tends to happen, you would find this with this survey, the Global Corruption Barometer, as well as the corruption perception index may not be in all Caribbean or administered in all Caribbean countries. In particular for the corruption perception index, you would find that is based on data sets used by other jurisdiction, other agencies such as the World Economic Forum, etc. So it's a survey of surveys. And this one is based on resources and access. So those countries listed are only those countries that have engaged in this particular survey. Joyce?
Hi, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I hope that answers his question. Yes. All right, no problem. We could move on.
Okay, great. So I want to get your thoughts on this, and you know, it's going to be interesting to hear. You've been asked to arrange a department Christmas party. We know it's Christmas time. Some places you may be able to do it, others you may not, but we would have done this at some point in time. And you decide to engage a catering company who usually would give, you know, preferential rates, a little discount, and say, here's what we can get this at a low cost or no cost, throw in a little extra. But that person also, whenever you have your child as her birthday party, you get free snacks from that same catering company. So what do you think about this? Is it that you use this catering company or not, or how do you think you should go about this? What are your thoughts?
And what we could do, we could raise our hands and then to speak, or we could use the chat. Participants?
Good morning again from the Bahamas. At some point I got knock off. I just was reconnected. So I didn't get the first portion of the question now you're asking as it relates to the question you just asked. I didn't get what led up to that.
Oh, sorry, nothing led up. This is the first scenario.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah. So you've been asked to arrange a department Christmas party. You are in customs, or you're in immigration, or you're in the prisons, and you decide to engage this company that usually would provide you with catering, all the food, all the drinks, etc. And they give you discounted rates all the time, you the individual, and they also give you some free snacks for your child when she has her birthday party. What are your thoughts?
We do have Donna. Donna, you want to say something? Your hand is raised. So we'll go to Donna. Is this corruption a form of corruption? Donna?
Sometimes, good morning, by the way, and I have Hema Sinanan with me, and we might have seen two faces. Trinidad and Tobago. My concern here would be mixing of personal and professional. It might be the better thing to keep your personal life a bit separate. In case of any problem, there would be no way that this thing can be linked to you personally for things to get messy. Another option would be to probably get two other options and let the decision be something that's a bit out of your hands so that, you know, it may be a little more transparent. But I think preferably your personal situation really should be kept a little more separate from the professional.
Thanks, Donna. So you would have some discomfort in engaging in this particular action. We have another question.
Yes, we do have several hands, Josh. We'll go to Lauren now. Laurel Jonas. Laurel.
Morning, everyone.
Morning.
So I laugh when I look at this question, well, the scenario, because we know that in reality, some persons would want to save $1. But I agree with the previous speaker to an extent. I would preferably have maybe 2 or 3 more persons and do like a bid and let persons then choose who would cater for the party. But then we all know in reality that persons would want to save a dollar. But just for transparency sake, have a bid done.
So this is one of the things in terms of the dilemma. The dilemma is, of course, I'm getting it cheaper than everybody else, but why am I getting it cheaper than everybody else? And what's the benefit that I'm getting? So very interesting point raised.
We have some other hands up. Solomon? Solomon?
Yes, we have to also keep in mind the context or the area that we are serving. Sometimes, let's just suppose that this caterer is either the only one available or the one that everyone knows that would give you the best service, the better prepared food items and all that. Even if there is that issue of them being benevolent and giving to your child's birthday party, has nothing to do with, or I should say, should have nothing to do with whether that availability of caterers and quality of catering, we need to take that into consideration also. Of course, I would agree with Donna. If you have option, I think we should look to put the options on the table. Have the team or some other person involved in the deciding which one should be chosen.
Okay. So that's an interesting thing, because now you're talking about what are some of the constraints that you're working under. If that's the only person, and the availability, the quality, the relationships that you have. So you see, what I'm trying to capture here is that it's never simple when we have to address corruption issues. Huh?
We have 4 more hands up, Josh.
So I'll take one to 2 more questions, and then I'll go into the definition here.
Okay, so we have Colville was next. Colville?
Yes, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Now, while I'm in agreement with some of the earlier speakers in terms of providing other options, I'd like to point out that not necessarily because you get preferential rates and so on, does it imply or necessarily imply corruption. It could be from some sort of long-term established relationship, and that is why things are as they are. So I don't really necessarily see it as strictly a corruption issue.
Okay, and then we have Noel.
Thank you, Colville.
All right, morning, everyone. Thank you. My response to this scenario is, firstly, I believe that there should be a declaration of the association between myself and the company if I am the one who will be engaging the procurement process of the snacks. So 1, a declaration of the association to minimize the perception that there are things being hidden for whatever interest or reasons. And secondly, I will go with a process to encourage or invite other suppliers or persons who could provide the services to have at minimum 3 or more comparison between different suppliers, and have a group of us who would decide on the most suitable company to engage. And if necessary, recuse myself from the process because of my own perceived subjective bias to the company to which I would have had a previous interaction with. And it is not to say that the process amounts to corruption, but to reduce the perception that people may believe that because of my association, I would be subjective in choosing that company over the others. So it's a matter of perception in addition to what is reality. And that's how I think it would be best to be approached. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
For that. And Josh, just one last, they took off the hand. It's okay.
Okay. Because what I'm going to say here, would it be any different, and you can just probably respond in the chat by yes or no. Would it have been any different if I switch the scenario to say that you are a local government councillor or a minister of works and transport, and you're required to build a building to house staff, and you decided to engage a company, a construction company, who usually would give you preferential rates and provide free material to you in the construction of your house. Would it have made a difference if I was to change it slightly like that? Okay. So I'm seeing some yeses come through. So what I'm showing you is that quite often, when we speak about kickbacks and we talk about, which is one corruption type, receipt of goods and services or money for referring business to particular individuals or companies in the tendering process or for appointment of recruits, what we find is that we apply subjective rules rather than objective rules, depending on the scenario and what we perceive as the quantum, the impact of it. And this is really what I wanted to come out in the discussion, which came out. The fact that if it's larger and it involves more money, same scenario, then we apply different rules and we think that, okay, something is terribly wrong here if we find out about it. But if it's not as correct, so it's right, no difference. And I'm seeing there, yes, there'll be a difference and it will involve a lot more persons and money. So I'm happy to see that we were getting somewhere in terms of application of rules. So let's go on to the next scenario because it's gonna lead to a lot of discussions, some of the others. So you were involved in a raid on a local gang. While conducting the raid, you encounter large amounts of cash. Your fellow colleague on the raid decides to pocket just a couple $100. It's a couple $1 million you found, a couple $100 as a material. He said it won't be missed. What do you do? I know this is going to be interested for some of our colleagues in one particular jurisdiction. So your thoughts. I see Ryan put something up there. Karen also. That's a no-brainer. Okay, what are your thoughts? Any comments?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, Barry from Grenada.
Hi, Barry.
Yes, what I would say, the first thing I would do, I would try to talk him out of it. And if he don't really want to understand or the position he has as a police officer, then I might have to report him to the supervisor, my supervisor.
Right. So it's you using your suasion, your friendship, your colleague, before you go to that next stage and say, hey, you're doing something wrong. So that's good. That's good. So sometimes it doesn't have to go straight up the line. You can resolve the problem. Yeah.
Because what we're realizing down here is that sometimes some people that are just, because of they see the money at the first instance, they might just say, wow, let me have some cash. But by talking to them, they might say, watch, that makes sense in truth, because doing certain things like that, that might cause a repercussion back to my family and friends and everything, and it don't look bad. So if they don't really want to go that way, then you decide, well, if it's that the way you're going, and I'm not that kind of officer, I'll have to report you, and then we'll go take it from there.
And I like that approach in terms of being able, but one of the other things you should do is record it. Yeah. So make a note of it that this happened, because sometimes things may emerge later down the line. Yeah.
Exactly.
Because that may be just the $100 that you saw. Perhaps the colleague engaged in other things. So I think this scenario seems to be clear cut because a lot of persons are putting in the chat. This actually took place, and as I said, in one jurisdiction, and I wanted to know what it is. So it's actually called opportunistic theft. So it's really stealing from arrests, traffic accident victims, victims of crime, the bodies or properties of deceased individuals. And this actually happens.
Josh, we had two persons who wanted to comment.
Oh, sure.
Jason and Solomon.
Jason and Solomon.
Yes, morning. Jason Lawrence from Jamaica. In that scenario, what you have to take in consideration as well is your life, because talking him out of it, you realize that you're not an inside, and to leave no evidence or leave no stone unturned, rather, then he don't want to get rid of you. So one of the best things you could do is just, if he say no, you don't push it. But at the same time, as I suggest, also, you could record him, and then you don't want to work with him anymore to protect your life and to do nothing with him. So you'd have to always take that in consideration as well. That's it.
I'm happy for that comment, because what it also shows is that as a member of law enforcement, the scenarios, the situations that you're put in from time to time are in fact life and death scenarios, even though your colleagues are around. So that you have to also recognize that there are persons who you may be working with, that this is their way of life and this is how they earn their income. Yeah. So, and that it could be life-threatening. So very good point. We have one more comment, Joyce?
Yeah, and that Lions actually touch on one side, and the other side is if you would have seen that and did not take some kind of action, and I would use the action that Lions took and what you had indicated about recording it. The next thing is that you yourself can be implicated as an accomplice.
Yes. So you also have to manage that. So what we see coming out here is one, the obligation to report. Whether something takes place or not, you have an obligation to report. But also two, how do you engage your fellow colleagues in law enforcement to act with integrity, to not be corrupt, to not engage in these practices? And it's really a judgment call, isn't it? And it's situational. So you're gonna find that in different situations, your approach may have to be different. But across the board, there is the recognition that what has happened in this scenario is wrong. It's breaching several things: code of conduct, it's theft, etc. So there are criminal actions, there are codes being breached, and it's important that something is done about it. The question is what and how. So in each situation, it would differ. So I'm happy that we have those different perspectives weighing in on this. So as I mentioned, it's called opportunistic theft. And I want to go on to the other scenario, because it's Christmas time, so my scenario is going to have a little bit of Christmas in it. So scenario 3, it's Christmas time and you are in need of some extra cash. We all are. As an immigration officer, a colleague in your department tells you about a business owner who mentioned to him that he's willing to pay for an expedited passport, and this can be across the board. You decide to process the passport with the expectation of receiving some extra money, because as I say, it's Christmas time. But you're then told by the businessman that he's not going to pay any extra money to you for processing this passport. What do you do? So this is another ethical dilemma. Joyce, any thoughts? Jason, yes, go ahead, Jason.
Yes, morning again, sir. I mean, this is a sticky task because you already put yourself in the corruption. And in return to receive your payment, the businessman say no. As a layman, two things you'll do. Either dispose of the passport, or you just give him the passport and call it a day. Because you put yourself in a sticky position. If you report it, then I believe you would be in more trouble. So I believe you would call it a loss.
All right. So that's an interesting point. Call it a loss of extra cash.
Well, we have Laurel's hand is up, and some persons are saying nothing. Some persons are saying process the passport. Some persons are saying a loss. Some persons are saying report it. Report him. Laurel?
The thing is, normally you would find that the departments would have like provisions for expedited passports with an extra cost. So I don't know why he would believe that he would have gotten some sort of extra money. He out of order. Bad. Because then it is the businessman, it is right. He may have paid extra to the department to get him the passport. But why you, as the immigration officer, feel now that you should have gotten something extra? You're just doing your job.
Good job.
The thing is, what would have made the scenario interesting was if that after doing that, the businessman gave him some money and he took it. Is that like, because you know there's a difference between, they say, like giving gifts and corruption and stuff like that, because at the end of the day you do your job. But then the businessman might say, oh, I liked how you dealt with me and you expedited and you ensured, here's an extra $200, and he took it. Then would that be looked at as corruption?
Right. So those are some interesting points. Some people may decide to say that they're going to withhold the passport from the person, and so you know it depends, and that's why I didn't want the outcome to be so specific, because it's clear in terms of, okay, corruption here. So it's a very interesting scenario because the businessman never really told you personally that he's going to pay some extra cash. He told a colleague of yours. So this colleague of yours say, if you do it for this man, you can get a little thing. You decide to do it, right, with the expectation of receiving extra funds from the businessman. So these funds are not legitimate fees paid to the immigration department, right? So that there's a bit of ambiguity here in terms of what to do. So Joycelyn, any other hands up?
Yes,
or any
I
other
do have
comments?
Donna. Donna is up.
Donna.
Yep, my mind kind of went along, and I'm wondering if that businessman could even report that this took place. And so I'm wondering, well, first of all, the person has to me, do nothing. I should do nothing because I put myself in this. But I am even wondering if telling my boss that this happened would be something stupid, depending on the relationship with my boss, because I don't know how bad this thing could get. Now, I know you all think that's kind of crazy, but I'm just wondering what kind of communication was used to get that idea across to me, because I'm thinking of paper trail and how this thing could lead to me. But this could get messy, or it could just be quietly disposed of with a decision to just do the passport.
So that is it. So one is you did it with the intent to get some gain from it, which is interesting. But the promise was not a promise given to you. It was a promise mentioned to a colleague. So it becomes very messy. And what you're seeing here, as I mentioned earlier, is that these ethical practices or situations are not always clear cut. This is usually how it happens. A conversation in the lunchroom by somebody who you consider a good colleague might say, hey, you want an extra thing? Somebody said, I want to do this for you now, and they'll pay some extra money. What do you do? Right? So it's never that simple. So
Edison, I think Edison.
Edison?
Oh, he lowered his hand.
Yes, morning again.
Good morning.
Morning again, you're correct. At the same time, your colleague could be the dirty guy in all of this, right? Because the promise, like you said, was made to the colleague. Now, you don't know the relationship between the colleague and the customer.
Correct.
So you now, being the good person, and yes, you trust your colleague, one or two things can happen. It could get nasty because the colleague could still get a gain and you get nothing of the deal, which now you can expose him. So it's a funny situation. So you must be careful how you're dealing with these information and things coming into you, you know?
I totally agree. So my take on this is, if you actually decide to withhold the passport from the person, then you create a scenario of this, shakedowns or extortions, where you have the acceptance of a bribe for not following through a real or threatened criminal violation. You see? Because you know you're doing something, and you know your intent was in fact to accept that bribe, no? That's why you did it. That's the motivation. So the motivation was to accelerate this process. It was to extort money, and if you decide not to do it, and then tell the businessman you have to pay me, then that's extortion. And we find quite often that there are promises made, and there are several cases that you would have seen throughout the region of various members of law enforcement extorting money for not reporting on something, for not giving someone a ticket, and that kind of thing. And it starts off with that very same thing, a promise to pay. When you look at some of these cases, it's a promise to pay or perception that they are going to pay or they have the money to pay. So we can think about extortion as that kind of thing. The scenario is way more complex than extortion. But if you go down the line where you withhold and you say, I'm not going to get this passport unless, you know, then you're extortion, then you're really engaging in extortion. So scenario 4, because we have about a couple more minutes again to finish. Your best friend who's a police officer owns a local bar that's open for business on weekends, and they tend to hold parties. We know that it's COVID time and parties are not allowed. What should you do? So what I'm bringing in here is a bit of your personal relationship. I'm bringing in a bit of your obligation as a police officer or member of law enforcement. What should you do? How should you address this issue? So he's also a police officer, so he understands what the regulations state. Your thoughts? Edison.
Good morning again.
Good morning.
Josh, I believe you got some ties in the Bahamas.
Oh, wow. do tell.
I say that because we dealt with a similar situation in the Bahamas where an officer, where it was being said that, how is it we can't operate our place, but the police who owns this bar can operate? You know, so the authorities, we pulled in the officer and we dealt with the officer, because at the end of the day, you're not different. You're no different. Where's your integrity? What example are you setting? Because people now are watching from outside and they're looking, and that's a problem. So the officer was dealt with as relates to the orders. That's how we dealt with that.
And that's excellent, because you have a live example of how you addressed this problem.
That's correct.
You see, quite often what we sometimes have is because of our personal relationships within law enforcement. That's your batch, right? You pass out together, you train together, you work together. That person may be your child's godfather or godmother. So there's that kind of link and trust in law enforcement that sometimes is not as high in other non-law enforcement environments. And therefore, sometimes you feel the need to protect each other, to bend the rules, you know? So there are these kinds of things, and you're caught between the relationship that you have with the person or persons and how you should act and your official obligation, public office, etc. So I'm happy to hear that the officer was dealt with in the Bahamas. But what are some of the other thoughts?
Friendship hinges. Shireen has her hand up, but then there's a comment on from Mr. Vigillo. Friendship hinges on respect. He's not your best friend if he does not respect you. He's just careless and only thinking of himself and greed. We do have Shireen. Those are some comments from the chat. We also have Shireen. Hands is up. Shireen.
Good morning.
Good morning.
If he's your best friend or she's your best friend, then there must be a relationship. And maybe the person just needs a reminder, because as you say, it can be the Christmas season and he's focusing on making some more funds, but you just need to remind him that there is a virus that is more dangerous than making the money. And if he is your best friend, as to say, then he will comply. Then if he doesn't comply now, then that is the time then you'll have to take it to another level. Then you'll have to report him or get him to your supervisor or somebody to deal with the issue.
Excellent. So I'm happy to hear that in this scenario there's a clear-cut answer by all of you. And I see, sorry, Joyce, are there some other comments in the chat? I see Lucius Lake wants to say something. Lucius?
Yes, sir. Good morning, all. As the previous caller said a while ago, if it is your best friend, because a lot of what's happening with COVID right now is unknown, you speak to your best friend, because speaking to him because of his activities may well put your life and that of your family at risk. And all what you said, it's true. It happens in all situations. We have some COVID police postal in St. Lucia now. So you speak to your friend. If not, you report the matter. It is worth parting friendship on, because the effects of it can bring this harmony to your home. And that is not the intention. Speak to him. He's your friend. You should have each other's secrets in hand. Let him know. If not, you're going to report it in. You may be saving his life by doing it. It's a straightforward thing. You are all law enforcement officers. We should be able to cross that bridge for the right purpose, as compared to going along with it and allowing him to do, and then you go and enforce somewhere else. It brings your integrity as a law enforcement officer into question. That's what I see.
I totally agree with you, because, excuse me, what we have sometimes, because this scenario could have been even more complex, where you belong to a group of police officers who usually go on patrol together, and you are aware of what in Trinidad we call a private zest, a private party that may have lots of people, and it's COVID time. And you are aware of that because they're in your batch. What do? You see? So quite often it's never that simple. It's because of being a part of the clique, respecting each other, your obligation. So I'm happy again to hear from everyone that yes, you talk to the person as your best friend, respect is important, the risk. And this is actually what Jason was speaking about in his remarks, where some of the actions, this perhaps would not have been as difficult an issue to address had it not been COVID times, that the actions or the omissions or non-actions by law enforcement in these situations could lead to increasing cases and increasing COVID deaths. So there is a direct link in this instance, quite a very simple scenario, but there's a direct link to this and increases in COVID and the spread as well as deaths. So this is good. So this is really what some of us are aware of. I was going to put some more spicy scenarios in this, but I say, let me simplify it and put it COVID. Quite often we have the protection of illegal activities. And that again is omission, right? And it's usually because police protect those who are engaging in those activities. Sometimes police officers or law enforcement, I'm not using police alone. In law enforcement, sometimes we do have illegal activities happening. We protect those protect persons who engage in illegal activities for whatever the benefit is, whether it's friendship, whether you're also benefiting, however it is. But this is important. Now, we've also heard of other members of law enforcement, whether it's prisons, for example, who persons may know about, contraband, etc., and protect colleagues. So part of it is trying to figure out from this, hey, here's what, it's illegal. The impact that it's going to have is in fact going to be significant. And in this particular case, as I said, loss of life. So this is the final case here. I decided not to have a lot of cases. This is the final case, but as we get into this scenario and we're finishing up here, I want you to ask yourselves, and I want to hear from you, now that we're going through these things on corruption and types and situations that you're going to be placed in, what is going to be your role in fighting it? What is going to be your role? So think about that in the back of your mind, because I'm going to come back to you at the end of this scenario to talk about what is your role and hear from you. So your final one here, your brother has been arrested by the police for an illegal firearm. You believe that he has been framed by crooked police officers. You're also a police officer. You decide to contact a fellow officer to get rid of the evidence to get your brother off. What are your thoughts? Two participants raise their hands. Let's see. Sharon, yes. I saw you had your hand raised. Sharon Gibson? Okay. Solomon?
Solomon.
Yeah.
Clearly, you never get involved in tampering with evidence as a police officer. And secondly, I think the best thing for you to do should be get your brother a good lawyer.
Good. I like that, Solomon. But it's sometimes never that simple. We do know about family members getting involved in activities, illegal activities, and our perception of who they are as good people.
Clearly, therefore, if we believe that that is a setup or is a frame, then that's why you need a good lawyer. As a police officer, we also have to guard against the conflict of interest.
Mm-hmm.
And as a police officer, in truth and in fact, the oath that I take I take it very seriously. And so I warn my brothers, my sisters, and all my family, don't get involved in any crime.
Right.
Because I may find myself having to choose to avoid conflict of interest. And in choosing, I may choose the oath that I took.
Sometimes it's never that simple when it comes to family members.
Yeah.
So let's hear what Byron Brown II has to say on this. Byron?
Byron, you're muted.
Hello, morning.
Hey, good morning.
Byron Brown here from Bahamas. I agree with 100% with Solomon. It's a little more difficult, especially dealing with offenses of a grave nature, such as firearms and such. You just have to get a good lawyer. You're also a police officer, and I think that's the key point in this scenario. So you now have the ability to, if you feel as though he was framed, you have the ability now to conduct some investigations, maybe on your own or with the assistance of some of your colleagues. But to go and get rid of a firearm, that's a little extensive. Yeah, that one, I would just leave that one alone. Like you say, just get a good lawyer and do what you can do from the other end.
Yeah, I agree. I see some other comments, and then I'll see if we amend the scenario. Remember, we can look at the scenario being complex like this and very onerous, and then the other one being very simplified. So I see another hand is up, Joyce.
Yes, Edison. Edison.
Good morning again. We as officers, we need to remember we are guided by a code of conduct and your Police Act. So when the officer knowingly that the firearm is illegal, even though his brother is being set up, he now needs to, like Solomon said, seek a good attorney, get proper advice now, bearing in mind knowing the situation what his brother is now up against. We don't know why that happened, because it could have been A and B in some type of relationship. We don't know. But looking in, you will have to seek legal counsel. And just remember, you're guided by the code of conduct and your police act as an officer. Your job, that's integrity is the order of the day.
Thank you for that comment. I see that we have some common threads, and I want to know whether this scenario would have been any different if I change it to your wife has been given a traffic ticket by a colleague who may not like you. You're a police officer and you now have to figure out what to do, and you contact another officer to get rid of that ticket or that entry. Would that have made a difference?
Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
Yes, in a case like that, your wife, you would have contacted the wife and tell her to cooperate. And if the ticket is a ticket that is issued that is not warranted, then you go to the courts. But if it is warranted, all you have to do is just advise her to pay the ticket and move on.
So that's a really good comment, because quite often, depending on the closeness of the relationship, and that's why I switched it to wife, and I reduced the impact of the offense to something like a ticket where you can just pay a fine. Because sometimes in instances like that, it's like, well, it's not that bad. So I could kind of see what I could do, do a little something, a little favor. And this really comes back down to, again, the use of your office, right? To ensure that you influence the course, in this instance, the course of justice. So it's really the fix, right? Which is about, and this, as I said, these came out of Camp Hope book on police corruption, law enforcement corruption, undermining criminal investigations or proceedings, or the deliberate loss of police files or dockets or evidence. You see, so what is shown here is that this is sometimes done, and this does not only, as I say, apply to police officers. It could apply to investigations that are ongoing within immigrations or customs in terms of seizures, or even in terms of activities happening within the prisons. So quite often we recognize that there's some kind of collusion of persons within law enforcement for things to happen. Joyce will welcome one or two comments, and then I would ask that question: what is your role in the corruption fight?
Josh, 1 minute before I go. Barry again from Grenada.
Hey, Barry.
Yeah, one question. Let me just go back one. You see, the thing is with the police officer and his brother. No, the police officer could be an upstanding police officer.
Mm-hmm.
And his brother maybe kind of careless type. No, they cannot get onto, the corrupt police officers realize what, I can't get onto that man, We go have to set up his brother to see exactly what he will do. So if he's not using his senses, I would say his police senses, he might react. And then that could cause him to be in great trouble. As well as he could just go along, as the other caller said, get a good lawyer and see if they can defend him. Likewise, we go back to the wife. You just allow her to pay the ticket. Because if you allow them to get onto you, is that what they're trying to do, It's to see how they can reach to you.
Correct.
Because they can't see you personally, they go try to use your family.
Of course.
This is one of the things we got to have our minds on and have a mindset. So when these things comes around, we have to come with ourselves and say, watch, this is what we have to do. And this is what we're going to do in the case.
Excellent.
So before you make any right decision, you sit down and you iron that out and do the proper thing.
I'm really proud and happy to hear the responses to not just this case, but all the other cases so far, because we realize that they're not simple, but many of us are placed in these scenarios where we see things that are happening that that perhaps are not aligned with what we know to be right, what we know to be legal, what we know to be of integrity and ethical practice or professional ethical practice. So then what do we do? And this scenario is really to start to open up our minds into thinking, yes, we can define corruption in so many different ways, and we can say bribery is this, and this is what the legislation says. But it comes back down to when placed in scenarios, when you encounter or interact with someone who engages in corruption or where you are asked to engage in corruption, what do you do? What do you do? And I see Donna, is it Donna Boodoo? Yes.
Yeah, yes. I just wanted to ask how you factor in any element of intimidation in any of these scenarios where you inject some influence. Somebody's telling you, look, you better, or else I know where your wife lives. How does that change these things? Because I feel that unless you're not considering that corruption, where I am pulsed, I feel pulsed.
And you're right, Donna. Quite often, you do have intimidation by other members of law enforcement or external entities, right? You do have intimidation in terms of your supervisors. You do have intimidation in terms of risk for life and limb. So perhaps if there's anyone here on the chat who has experienced situations of intimidation before within their job, you don't have to be very specific, but can you share with us how you've been able to address intimidation, whether by your superiors or by fellow colleagues or externally?
Yes, sir. Me again. The way I see it, if you are known as a no-nonsense officer from the onset, that when it is wrong, you say it is wrong, as painful as it may seem, that you don't do what the masses require. A lot of the things that happen around may not happen in your presence, or if at all it has happened, there's a lot to cover it up. So in some instances, you may not be aware of what is happening in your presence because you are not part of that aspect of it. So sometimes it is difficult to point out and say, well, this is what you have seen or this is what you're aware of. Because the whole thing about whistleblowers and how you deal it that way is to whether or not it is accepted. Are you wearing this blue shield and you are safeguarding your officers, or you put yourself in a situation that when you go along doing as is required of you, and like the brother from Grenada said, they may be trying you to see where your weakest point is, or you can go to the extent actually trying to set you up because you are not going along with the flow. So it's not a thin line, it's a thick line. Is where you draw your line in the sand, then and only then will you know exactly what you can do or how far you are willing to go by not putting yourself into the same lines as them, taking your oath seriously, and looking forward to a retirement where your name is mentioned thereafter. There are no corruption or there are no fingers pointed at you, but the other way around, you can point fingers at the others. So it is overly difficult and not as clear as it may seem in a lot of instances, knowing how the Caribbean is, and number two, if the involvement of political interference at all levels. Sometimes it is very difficult, but it is you, the individual officer, and where you draw your line in the sand.
And thank you very much for that comment. I just want to get a sense generally, and you can probably put yes in the chat or no. Just quickly, is intimidation a serious problem within your law enforcement body? So we don't know, all the bodies that you come from, but I just want to know whether if that's a serious issue, intimidation. So I'm seeing no, yes, no, yes. Just no, okay. So based on the responses so far, peer pressure, interesting, lots of yeses, political, definitely, no, no, I don't think so, yes, somewhat. So it seems as though that Joyce, this is something that probably should, we should have a conversation about at some point, which is how then do we build a community of members of law enforcement who stand up for what is right and address the whole issue of intimidation in their role? Because the question is, who's helping you? You're a police officer, but who's your police officer, essentially? Who can you report to? So we find that having independent complaint bodies or processes would help in this process. So I just want to close. Finally, what is your role? What is your role based on all of this? What is your role in this anti-corruption fight? We've heard about several scenarios that are specific to you and your experience in law enforcement. We are recognizing the role of external influences as well as internal influence and intimidation. But what is your role and how do you see yourself as combating corruption? So you can, I see someone said only Jesus can help. So perhaps that's one of the things, prayer. But what is your role? So if we can get 1 or 2 comments and then I'll close, Joyce.
Hands, please, raise hands. Thank you. Lead by example.
Byron.
Yeah, I think it goes back to, I think more, we have to get more education, first of all. Seminars such as this help. A lot of people don't really understand the smaller scenarios. I think we had a few examples, we had a few scenarios here where and we kind of changed the wording in it a few times to make it a bit smaller. We changed from a firearm to, let's say, a ticket. Some officers and some persons in positions do not really understand that certain things they do in our corrupt forms or acts of corruption. So if we can do more to educate, I think we should be heading in the right direction.
Thank you very much, Byron. So a need to increase education of law enforcement, and perhaps having these discussions with your colleagues who are not on this morning could lead to, we're going to provide these slides on CBSI Connect on the platform, so you're going to get it. You're going to get them, sorry. But perhaps it's something that you can talk about and you can utilize them and have discussions around it. So I like that comment. Anyone else, Joyce? Comments?
Yes, we do have Jason, but someone in the chat asked if we could go back to scenario 1. So we could speak to Jason here, Jason's views, and then you could go back to scenario 1.
Sure.
Jason?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. What you look on is to, as they earlier on they said, lead by example. But as human beings, we always use feelings to carry out activities from time to time. And once there's a set policy or guidelines that you are to follow, no matter what the circumstances and you follow that guideline, you're gonna have persons that don't like you. You're gonna have persons that like you. But if you try to please everyone, then you're gonna fail. So once you lead by the example based on the policy or the guidelines that is outlined to carry out your daily tasks, then you're good to go. You're good to go. Once you do that, you're good. You're definitely good to go.
Thank you. So I went back into scenario 1 for someone.
Troy.
Troy.
Troy, Bridgman.
Yeah, Bridgman.
Yes, please. I just want to see the type for the scenario 1.
So what's influencing your choice in this instance here is the fact that you're getting something, you're getting a kickback, whether you're receiving some goods, you're getting free snacks for your child, additional services or money perhaps for referring that business to particular individuals or companies or affecting the tendering process. Quite often kickbacks are used with massive construction projects with government. We tend to talk about kickbacks and bid rigging, which is influencing the bidding process or the tendering process. You see, so what I did was to shift our attention away from those big things that we clearly identify as corruption to applying them in our own scenarios, in our own activities, simplifying them and reducing them to something like a Christmas party to see whether the rules apply. Yeah?
Yes, thank you very much.
You're welcome, Troy. Okay.
Sasha here.
Hi, Sasha.
How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Okay, as it relates to avoiding corruption, to my mind, some of these scenarios, specifically the ones which involve relatives or persons who were close to you, because of this relationship, persons felt inclined to assist their family or their friends. As it relates to avoiding corruption, if we start off in taking, or rather recusing ourselves, so to speak, we recognize this person as a family member, and if we get involved, there can be serious implications. If we take that stance where we say, all right, maybe I'm going to direct you to somebody else who I believe can assist you, and separate yourself from that situation at the very basic level, you put yourself in a position where your integrity cannot be called into question.
Excellent. And I just think that this is Sasha Marshall. I just look back to confirm. This is Sasha Marshall that was in cadets with me in Barbados.
Oh yes, it is.
one of my junior cadets.
Yes, it is.
Excellent, excellent, Sasha. I'm proud. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's all for me. If there are no further comments or questions, just to say that we would be moving on to 5-minute break. Then we head into Transparency's presentation in terms of how can civil society and law enforcement partner to address the whole issue of corruption in our member states. And thank you once again. So Joyce, we'll break for 5 minutes, and then and Dion will use that time to kind of go through your slides and if you have any technical challenges. Over to you, Joyce.
All right, thank you. So we'll break now. It's 10:43, so we'll be back. Is it 10 minutes, Josh, or 5?
We'll have a 5 minutes break because that would allow Dion. I know we're a little bit behind time.
Okay.
Yeah.
No problem. Thank you.
You're welcome.
CBSI Connect system is one of our main regional projects under the Caribbean Basin Security Initiative, which started in 2010 and was a recognition by the CARICOM states, the Dominican Republic and the United States, that we needed a joint approach to some of the security issues that we're facing in the Caribbean. So CBSI Connect was a way to promote law enforcement information sharing across the Caribbean region.
CBSI Connect allows each institution to act independently with its own independent portal site, but also replicate credentials to a shared site where collaboration and learning can take place among all participating institutions.
Through the Caribbean Basin Security Initiative, we've started several regional programs, whether that's justice sector training, training on ballistics investigations, or law enforcement investigations training. And through CBSI Connect, these trainings can be broadcast to all member states.
Academies, agencies have been using it. We have had an increase in enrollment of participants for courses.
The knowledge that has been gained in the field, the knowledge that has been gained in the region can be shared, and that sharing and that collaboration is what makes this a very special asset moving forward for Caribbean law enforcement.
CBSI Connect users can either view our trainings at the academies themselves that are installed conference centers, or they can even use it at their laptop, on their laptops at home. And I believe we now also have mobile capability, So it is truly a training system that's accessible anywhere.
We have regular meetings with heads of academies. We meet regularly with agencies in the region. We get their input into courses and programs that are being offered on CBSI Connect.
Trafficking in people, trafficking in drugs, trafficking in money transcends the participating institutions in the region and truly becomes regional problems. The sharing of information, shedding sunlight, sharing expertise is a very important tool in combating these issues.
We've seen several positive impacts from the availability of training on CBSI Connect. One of them, of course, is a travel cost savings, because you no longer have to spend a day traveling and buy an expensive flight to go receive a training at another academy.
The training that has been done on CBSI Connect for law enforcement officers has had tremendous response. We have had an increase in enrollment of participants on CBSI Connect. We have had academies putting more courses on CBSI Connect. We have had training every month on CBSI Connect.
We encourage the use of the system for both internal training and external training, and we are trying to build out the library of available courses stored on the system, and we encourage our member states to upload their individual training, which they want to share with the community.
If there are courses that are available that pique your interest, that could enhance your job, your ability to perform your duties as a professional over CBSI Connect, seek them out, participate, engage. This is really the value of what this technology brings to the region.
And that has allowed different academies to build much stronger ties with each other and cooperate on shared law enforcement challenges in the region.
Hi, Joyce and Dion.
Hold on.
Hi, Josh.
Yes, Josh.
Yeah.
Josh?
Yes, Joyce. I see Dion is on. I can hear him clearly.
Yes.
Are you able to share your screen, Dion?
Sure.
No, we'll share it for him.
Okay, great.
Right. Very nice.
Okay, Dion, we're ready whenever you are.
I'm ready. Let's do it.
So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to our second session on our webinar on World or International Anti-Corruption Day. Next up, we have Mr. Dion Abdul. Dion is the chair of the Trinidad and Tobago Transparency Institute. It is one of over 90 chapters, Dion? Over 90
chapters.
Over 90 chapters of Transparency International around the world. So it's important that we recognize that this is a global anti-corruption network that seeks to curb corruption and address corruption globally. And the Trinidad and Tobago Transparency Institute has played a major role within Trinidad and the wider region in building national chapters and or assisting rather in the construction of or establishment of national chapters in Guyana, in Grenada, in Jamaica. And so it's important to have Dion here today. And Dion is a very good colleague of mine. And so I'm quite happy to have transparency on this morning. So Dion, over to you.
Thank you very much, Josh.
You're welcome.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the Caribbean. Let me start by thanking Caribbean Impacts and Josh and his team for inviting me to speak on this forum on this very important day, International Anti-Corruption Day. I bring greetings from Transparency International TI, and in particular from the local chapter, Trinidad and Tobago Transparency Institute, TTTI. TI's theme for this year's event today is Recover with Integrity. Bearing in mind the COVID-19 pandemic and the funds being expended by all of our countries, regionally, internationally, in order to deal with this pandemic, we have decided to focus on the expenditure for recovering with integrity and bringing us back on even keel at the very least with the situation that we have after the pandemic. I couldn't help but listening to some of the discussions and conversations while Josh was presenting. And it's so important that integrity be part of our daily lives, not just at the workplace, but at home and wherever we may find ourselves in our community and so on. Corruption in normal times is bad, far less for a situation like where we have a crisis. It impacts not only on the quality of people's lives, but in fact, it has been known to cost lives. Whistleblowers can help stop this. Transparency in public contracts can help us stop this. We are clear that anti-corruption legislation is a requirement without any condition. Let me just tell you a little bit about TTTI. Our organization was launched in 1998 by a group of concerned and committed citizens. Believe it or not, the brainchild was a public servant, a former permanent secretary and chief personnel officer, Reginald Dumas. Sometimes the patient has to diagnose himself. TTTI was the first transparency chapter in the Commonwealth Caribbean. The NIA in Jamaica followed, and soon TI Guyana will be a full-fledged chapter. We have, as part of our work and outreach, supported the development of entities in Barbados, St. Kitts, Bahamas, Grenada, St. Lucia, throughout the length and breadth of the Caribbean. As a national chapter of Transparency International, TTTI is anchored to TI's strategy, which at this time and for the next few years is holding power to account. We are supported with skills, tools, experience, and expertise in fighting corruption by TIS in Berlin and 90 other chapters, or more than 90 other chapters as just mentioned, around the world.
Dion, do you need us to change the slide or?
Yeah, I thought they were driving it from the end. Yeah.
Sorry, yes. So just let us know when to click next. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, this is fine. Corruption has the effect of undermining institutions of democracy, especially in our small island states, from which many of us here come from. And transparency recognizes that our advocacy efforts can have greater impact if we partner with organizations like-minded and interested in the development and prosperity of our Caribbean peoples. This network that we have been trying to develop has recently borne fruit, and soon you'll be hearing about a network of anti-corruption bodies in the Caribbean. The acronym is TICAN, Transparency International Caribbean Action Network. And the drivers of that entity will be, of course, Trinidad and Tobago, Jamaica, Guyana to start with. We have very active contacts in Barbados, Suriname, St. Kitts, Nevis, Bahamas, and so on. And we expect them to come on board in the fullness of time. We helped as well to establish the EITI in Trinidad and Tobago, that is the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, which deals with the resources of our country, the mineral resources of our country. We were also instrumental in its formation in Guyana. And we partner with the local EITI on projects such as beneficial ownership disclosure for companies. Any project that we feel will shed light and assist with the eradication of corruption and the development and improvement of good governance in our country. Next slide, please. This slide shows some of our key activities, some of which we'll talk a little bit about, and some of which, just for you to note, the launch of our Corruption Perception Index, for example, each year, the hosting of our annual anti-corruption conference, highly successful, widely attended, and looked forward annually by many stakeholders. One of our big efforts, which I have to say came to fruition last night, was the advocating for the reform of public procurement legislation. But we'll talk a minute about that in a minute or so. Let me turn specifically to the partnership under discussion, civil society, and in particular, anti-corruption and integrity organizations. That is to say, law enforcement agencies in our various jurisdictions. Perhaps it might be a good idea to look at, for a second, a case study. And the best might be, particularly for those of us in Trinidad and Tobago, will be, I think, the Piarco Airport scandal. Next slide, please. This is arguably the most infamous case of grand corruption in Trinidad and Tobago. And we have reports of billions of dollars of taxpayers' money having found its way into the hands of financiers of a political party and other persons. Persons have been charged, and they include 2 former ministers. Civil society, of which transparency finds itself as part of, was instrumental in the demand for a commission of inquiry. Civil society members gathered information and evidence, and we presented what we found on this matter to the public. There were press conferences to gather support, to raise the awareness of what had transpired. Subsequently, the Commission of Inquiry was launched, and civil society found itself making recommendations for improvement of the procurement processes to the Commission. These recommendations, so many years ago, formed the basis for improved public procurement legislation. And since that time, we have been in the vineyard advocating for, driving for, lobbying for, perhaps even praying for improved public procurement legislation. And as I mentioned, after much debate and representation by civil society, activities which were being driven up to this weekend, right up to the hearing in the Senate yesterday and last night, legislation was finally passed in the upper house, albeit not with all the provisions that civil society was advocating for. TTTI in Trinidad and Tobago and national integrity action in Jamaica run what we call ALACs, advocacy and legal advice clinics. We provide legal assistance to victims and witnesses of corruption. Next slide, please. We have learned that vulnerable citizens, this particular category of our citizens, have a fear, a mistrust, or they may be intimidated to approach a law enforcement officer or institutions to lay their complaint. Oftentimes, they recite complaints of systems and people in the systems which prevent them from launching a formal complaint. The ALACs, the advocacy and legal advice clinics, are staffed by attorneys and provide a great opportunity for partnership with law enforcement agencies. Sitting in those clinics, people walk off the streets to tell you about instances where they have witnessed or they have evidence of corruption. Sitting in those offices, you realize that many people are not aware of the opportunities that are available to them, the options that are available to them to report incidences, matters of corruption. We in Trinidad and Tobago have partnerships with the ALAC, with other entities such as the Hewing Law School. And each semester we provide law students the opportunity to learn about this particular area of law, corruption, fraud, and anti-corruption in a practical way. We have formed partnerships with the FIU, the Fraud Squad, the ACIB, the Integrity Commission, and so on. Because we fully understand that in this fight against corruption, for the benefit of all of us, we need all hands on board. And particularly if we understand that civil society, while they may have voices, they generally do not have resources. They may not even have the expertise or the experience. So at our ALAC, for example, we will pull together a file where a complainant has laid bare the facts of reported or alleged corruption. And if we find that a prima facie case is made out based on the legal advice we have received, we will then take the next step to take it up the ladder to the fraud squad or where the chips may lie. In most of our jurisdictions, we lack whistleblowing protection. And a well-structured partnership between civil society organizations and law enforcement agencies can provide whistleblowers with the safe opportunity they need. In our country, for example, whistleblowing legislation made its way to the parliament last year and did not receive the full support that it should have to ensure the protection of those citizens who will provide the information and perhaps even evidence that there is some wrongdoing in some sector of our society. Law enforcement agencies and civil societies organizations need to work together to provide that opportunity for whistleblowers to properly lay their complaint and for us to determine whether or not there are facts we can act on. Otherwise, at this time, it's a free-for-all. Perhaps our own Panama Papers, or maybe we can call it Caribbean Papers, may not be too far off if we can provide a safe place for whistleblowers to provide information and evidence. Next slide, please. Civil society can help law enforcement agencies. We can advocate on the part of law enforcement agencies and perhaps be the voice for things that should be or perhaps should be put right. And I speak particularly, for example, of an example that we can use where TTTI and other civil society organizations lobbied for, advocated for the removal of the ACIB, our local anti-corruption investigations bureau, from under the purview of the Attorney General. That is under the hand of a political entity. And today, as a result of the sustained campaign, the ACIB is within the fold of the TTPS. We can be that voice for the law enforcement agency. We can assist in partnership with the law enforcement agencies in understanding what is the best practice internationally and what we can provide in terms of expertise and advocacy. Next slide, please. In our small island states, investigative journalism can be a life-threatening job. It's one of those areas where if you do your job well, you may not benefit from it. Next slide. There are several reported instances of journalists investigating corrupt and or criminal activity being threatened or harassed. In Trinidad and Tobago, we have had reports of journalists having to retreat to safe havens to avoid their lives being threatened or injury to themselves. One comes easily to mind, a reporter called Mark Passant, who had to fly out of Trinidad a few months ago when he was investigating a matter. The work of these journalists are of tremendous benefit to law enforcement agencies, and civil society has tried to support and encourage this activity. Trinidad and Tobago Transparency Institute and the NIA in Jamaica in particular have pursued the training and certification of investigative journalism. There is now a civil society organization, a body called CIJN, the Caribbean Investigative Journalism Network, providing resources, training, and materials to investigating and investigative journalists in the Caribbean. This is an important source of information and evidence to support the work of law enforcement agencies. So often in our small island states, we find that it's too small. We know each other. We know someone who knows someone, and therefore, perhaps, just perhaps, if we widen our geography and allowed an investigative journalist from Jamaica, say, to come into Guyana, or Trinidad, or Dominica, as opposed to the local journalists, they might be able to give us greater and more effective information and evidence that the law enforcement agency can act on. Law enforcement agency must join with civil society organization and support us in our trust and our insistence for an independent, vibrant media. They must join us in the call for the protection of journalists. We all need each other to support each other in this fight for good governance, for at least the reduction of corruption in our countries. Next slide, please. Next month, January 2021, TI will release its Corruption Perception Index, the CPI. This is a composite index measuring public sector corruption since 1995 and across 180 countries. Next slide, please. The Corruption Perception Index measures a number of factors, criteria, you may call it, and these include bribery, the existence of adequate anti-corruption laws, and so on. Our research based on the CPI year after year indicates a few countries who traditionally sit at the top of the rankings. They are the least corrupt. And then those countries who traditionally sit at the bottom, they are the most corrupt. In the Caribbean, we have the luxury of saying we have some countries who rank well, like Barbados, and we have countries who rank somewhere in the middle of the table, like Jamaica and even Trinidad and Tobago. Normally, about 180 countries are surveyed, and data sources are taken by a number of institutions, international institutions, and they measure not the fact, they measure the perception of corruption. The top ranked countries I mentioned, these are the Nordic countries, Sweden, Denmark, and so on. Together with New Zealand, Singapore, they have a common factor of, guess what? Effective prosecution of corrupt officials and trust in public institutions, including law enforcement agencies. In fact, when we dive deep into why some Caribbean countries score higher or rank higher than some others, the same factors are thrown up to us. The higher ranked countries in the Caribbean echo the findings of our research. That is, the effective prosecution of corrupt officials and trust, this commodity that we call trust in public institutions. One only has to look over the years at the rankings of, as I mentioned, Barbados, and compare it to the rankings of our own country here, Trinidad and Tobago, and Jamaica, Guyana as well. Initiatives such as the CPI provide the platform for collaborative work with law enforcement agencies. If we are to improve the perception of corruption in the Caribbean, these surveys point to those areas where we need to focus our energies, where we need to focus in the fight to deal with matters of corruption and wrongdoing, the areas where we need to improve our governance. And initiatives such as the CPI are useful for law enforcement agencies to look at. These surveys are relied upon by international funding agencies, by international investment organizations, by international organizations which look towards the Caribbean to invest in, to get involved in, and so on and so forth. It is useful for us, civil society, and law enforcement agencies to collaborate in this area to see how we can together assist in reducing or rather improving the perception of the Caribbean. According to United Nations Secretary General, corruption squanders public resources, undermining, next slide please, undermining sustainable, inclusive, next slide, development and peaceful societies. We in civil society can offer a number of attributes, a number of options, a number of assets, as you may call it, that can assist law enforcement agencies in this common fight that we have. We work across sectors, private sector, civil society, and government. Recently, for example, Trinidad and Tobago was one of the few chapters of transparency that completed a business integrity country agenda project, essentially looking at the issues of corruption, not just in the public sector where people traditionally point fingers at, but also at the private sector. What are the best practices we can introduce there? It takes two hands to clap. It takes two hands to clap. Pointing the finger at the public sector alone does not and cannot and will not solve the problem. It takes two to tango, if we may learn a little Spanish now. Watchdog. We shed light on issues. Civil society does that. And whether it's domestic violence, whether it's human rights issue, whether it's matters of corruption and bad governance. We have our eye out as independent members of society to bring awareness about it. I spoke a short while ago about the Piaco Airport project. If it was not for civil society insisting on that matter being brought to the public's attention and continuously driving for something to be done, perhaps we may not ever have heard of it. We are a resource hub. We provide information, expertise, experience. You may be amazed at the kind of people who find themselves in civil society organization. I recently had the opportunity to work with United Way in a project to develop, at the time, a common legislative base and agenda for civil societies. And the caliber and quality of the personnel that I had to work with, I was very impressed. So we do have resources, we do have research capability, knowledge and know-how. What we may lack, however, is the financial resources. And perhaps, even though I say we have resources, even the human resources in terms of number and capacity, there might be some challenging areas for us. We bring actors together. Civil society is a broad brush for a number of different actors. And if today is Anti-Corruption Day, and if you were perhaps at any of our event during the past years before the pandemic stopped us from meeting together as one, you would have seen we brought together artists, spoken word poets, actors, and so on, for us to demonstrate that whatever and wherever we sit in society, we need to take a stand against some things to ensure that the quality of life in our countries is one that we would want to have. Advocacy, I mentioned that several times. We represent the interests of not just ourselves, but the citizen who may not have a voice, the common person in our citizenry who may not have that voice. So, for example, in the matter involving the procurement legislation, those who have been looking on, they will have seen several media releases involving the GCC, the Chambers of Commerce, Transparency, TTCSI, and many others advocating for improved procurement legislation in our country. We join forces when we have to. I remember a particular issue arising out of the Freedom of Information Act about a year and a half ago, or maybe even more, when again, there was an attempt to amend the legislation without what we thought was proper consultation. Civil society over a weekend came together, over 20-something of us, on the telephone, on the email and stuff, and we were able to get the government to put a pause on that particular agenda to review that legislation before it went out. There is strength in acting together. And we think there is even greater strength, there's even greater opportunity for change if we find a proper structured format for working with the law enforcement agencies. Let me remind you, as I come to a close, that as the Secretary General says, corruption squanders public resources, your resources, our resources. It undermines sustainable development. Sustainable means long-lasting, far-reaching development, not just improvement for today or tomorrow, but beyond, and peaceful societies. There is tremendous opportunity for civil society and law enforcement agencies to collaborate on the issues of corruption. The time is now. The time is now. Let us hold power to account in the transactions involving public resources or resources, law enforcement agencies, and civil society together to protect our Caribbean resources. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dion, for that amazing presentation, identifying what you're doing at Transparency, what are the key things that you're working on, but specifically, how can law enforcement members present today, how can they partner with Transparency and similar civil society organizations in the region to combat corruption? It is important for all of us, and that's really why the additional tag to the theme is that we're all in this together in the anti-corruption fight, because we all have to pool resources. Civil society has a role in holding government to account. Law enforcement has a role in terms of being able to keep a fair system of accountability in place. Government has a role, the private sector has a role. And so it's important for all of us to work together in the anti-corruption fight. Once again, we would like to thank the Trinidad and Tobago Transparency Institute for agreeing to give this presentation, and we look forward to continued engagement with TTTI. I would now hand over to Joyce, who would do closing and some final comments. Joyce, over to you.
Hi, thank you so much, Josh. But for this time, what I'd like to do maybe in the next 5 minutes or so to ask the participants to share their comments or final words on corruption, if I may.
Sure, thank you, Joyce.
Participants.
So any questions to Dion? Dion, you're now in the hot seat. Apologies.
Yes, so participants, any final words, comments? Donna, thank you.
Yeah, sorry. I just had a question concerning the advocacy and legal advice centers in Jamaica and Trinidad. I don't know if I missed it, but when was that established in Trinidad? Could you say? I don't know if I missed it.
No, it started about 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago.
Okay. And how many centers are there, if I may ask?
In Trinidad, we have one center, and it's located at our offices on the Eastern Main Road, the Fernandez Complex buildings. We are located right there. I will share, and Josh will share, I guess, the contact information for the ELAC after the program.
Sure, Dion, will do.
Thank you. Any other participant?
I see Solomon has his hand up. Solomon?
Yes, Solomon.
Yes, I wanted to find out, Dion. I know that we have some civil society advocacy here in Grenada. But you mentioned only three organizations, and it seems as though Guyana actually is still pending, maybe for this week or sometime. I don't know. Is Transparency International or the especially Caribbean, let me get it. The something can the TI can?
Yes.
And so I'm not putting it on Trinidad or on Jamaica or on Guyana. Are you thinking of assisting, or I don't know how you might do your drives to have that that kind of advocacy spread throughout the other islands?
The short answer to that is yes. What happened to be established as a chapter of Transparency, there's a process First, they start with a national contact. They find someone or some entity that is conducting this type of work. And then there's a period of time, they monitor, they observe, and their reports into TI, they do their own research, and then they accredit the chapter. What we have been doing, particularly in Trinidad, and I know Professor Trevor Monroe, who's head of NIA in Jamaica, and my colleagues there as well, some really good colleagues, Marlon Moore and others. We have outreach program. So the Guyana chapter, for example, actually started as an outreach program. When we went to Guyana, we invited Guyana people over to Trinidad for anti-corruption conference. I myself have been to Grenada, where I've had 2 sessions in Grenada in the past. We have active people, very active in Barbados, more than one entity in Barbados, for example, who we encourage to be part of our network at this time. St. Kitts, St. Lucia, and the unfortunate thing with Bahamas, we had a very strong contact presence there until recently, but we are working on that again. So the advocacy has 2 parts. One is in terms of dealing with the issues before us and the rest of the Caribbean. And the network that we are trying to establish is to provide resources available, expertise available, not just locally by ourselves, but across the region. And that second part of it is the outreach program to encourage and assist all of those entities and persons in those islands who we share a common, not just culture maybe, or heritage even, but also common issues perhaps, and encourage them to come to the fore so that we can support them and nurture those entities in the embryonic stages to go to the next step of getting accreditation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Dion. And if there are no further comments, Josh, on behalf of the Executive Director of CARICOM Impact, Lieutenant Colonel Michael Jones, and my colleague Josh, we want to take this opportunity to propose our appreciation to those who directly and indirectly contributed to this webinar. Beginning with our presenters, Mr. Jason D. Rickelt. He's the Corruption and Economic Crime Branch from the Corruption and Economic Crime Branch in the UNODC office. And also to you, Mr. Dion Abdul, the chairpersons of Trinidad and Tobago Transparency Institute. And of course, our very own Josh Drayton, our Financial Crimes and Asset Recovery Specialist at CARICOM Impacts. We are truly happy for the knowledge you shared with us today. And also, I want to just highlight some comments from the group. Andrew Matheson, he says it begins with individual, that's corruption, ethics. It begins with individual. Each person beginning with himself must accept the responsibility of ensuring we stay away from any corrupt activity and act appropriately. And Vanette says money is the reason why most people get involved in corruption. I believe if we are educated on money management, less people will become involved. And also from Kishel Modest, there is no reason, no excuse for corruption. We should not succumb or get involved. Our integrity as an individual is important. However, one reason some officers engage in corruption is because the administration of our organization failed to put our welfare at the forefront. After all, police officers are humans and not robots. And we did have a lot of comments in the chat, but those are just a few that I took out. And we do thank all participants today, and do look forward for your attendance at other upcoming webinars, such as tomorrow, 10th December, in celebration of International Human Rights Day. We are partnering with United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees to give an overview of human rights and responsibilities of persons. And we'll be focusing on the work of the UNHCR and the 1954 Convention. And on Friday, 11th November, in recognition of International Day of the Abolition of Slavery, which is celebrated annually on the 2nd of December, but we'll be celebrating it, recognizing it tomorrow. I'm sorry, on Friday. We're having a panel discussion on hidden truth, perception, and realities of modern day slavery. And we do have panelists, persons from UNODC, IOM, representative from Trinidad, Guyana, UK Border Force, and also University of the West Indies, Cave Hill, Barbados. As law enforcement, we're hoping that you could join us on these webinars, two upcoming webinars. And of course, as law enforcement officers, I am aware of the business and the busyness of December and January month. But we are still hopeful that you could join us for the upcoming seminars, Thursday and Friday. And we thank you once again for participating. And I mean, let me not forget the CBSI team, Troy, Candy, Angela, and Tracy, for their assistance in the background to ensuring this webinar is a success. Continue to have a safe and awesome day, colleagues, and the season's greetings. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joy and Joyston, sorry. And that brings us to the end of today's session. And thank you, everyone, for your participation. And do have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Same to you. Have a good day, everyone. Have a